He told her, "I don't want a pregnant girlfriend." 5 years later he walked into a gala, and came face to face with 3 little girls who looked exactly like him. It was late evening in Manhattan, and the city outside the glass walls of Hastings Tech headquarters pulsed with neon life. But inside the sleek minimalist office on the 34th floor, the air was still and cold. Emily stood near the window, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small folded piece of paper. Her breath hitched as she looked at Liam Hastings. A man who once whispered dreams into her ear, and now stared at her like she was a stranger. He was everything the magazine said: polished, powerful, devastatingly handsome, with piercing blue eyes and hair like carved sunlight. But tonight he looked distant. Icy. "I'm pregnant," she said finally, her voice soft but steady, though her stomach knotted in fear. Liam didn't react at first. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tense. His silence was louder than any shout could have been. "How far along?" he asked, after a long pause, his voice low and measured, as if he were discussing quarterly losses instead of the lives they had created. 11 weeks, she said. "It's triplets?" That word seemed to shift something in the air. He blinked once, then exhaled slowly, pressing his fingers against his temple like this was a negotiation going south. "This can't be happening," he muttered. Then louder, firmer. "Emily, I'm not ready for this. I'm not that kind of man. You know who I am." She looked at him, eyes burning. "I thought I did." He stood up abruptly and walked toward the bar in the corner of the room. Poured himself a drink. Didn't offer her one. He drank in silence for a few seconds, before turning to face her again. "I can give you money, anything you need, but I can't be part of this. I have my company, my life. This isn't part of the plan." Emily felt her heart split open, slowly and cruelly. "They're not a plan, Liam. They're people, our children." "No," he said firmly, "they're your responsibility. I never asked for this." He pulled out a checkbook and scribbled something quickly, tore out the page and placed it on the edge of his desk, not even looking at her. "This should cover whatever you need, doctors, whatever." She stared at the paper but didn't touch it. The amount didn't matter. He could have offered her $1 million and it would have been the same. What she needed, he had just torn away with one sentence. "I don't want your money," she said quietly. "I wanted your honesty. Your support. Your decency." "You'll be fine," he said, already turning away. "You're strong. You don't need me." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You're right, I don't." Without another word she walked out, holding the ultrasound image against her chest like a shield. The receptionist didn't look up as she passed. The elevator ride felt like freefall. As the doors closed, Emily wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered to the 3 lives inside her, "I've got you, I promise." And even though her world had just shattered, something inside her began to glow. Fragile, but fierce. Winter came early that year in New York. The cold wind tore through Brooklyn's streets like a warning, whispering in every crack and crevice that life would not be easy. Emily found herself living in a cramped, crumbling walk-up apartment in Flatbush, a far cry from the glossy world she used to float in when Liam was beside her. The floor creaked with every step, the windows barely kept out the chill, and the radiator hissed like it hated her, but it was hers. The rent was late more often than not, and her upstairs neighbor played music loud enough to wake the dead. But at least no one could tell her to leave. Not yet. She was working 2 jobs, sometimes 3 when she could stand long enough. Her mornings began at a corner diner on Church Avenue, where she served coffee to construction workers and city employees who barely noticed her swelling belly. Her evenings were spent cleaning classrooms at a local school, dragging a mop through fluorescent-lit hallways until her back screamed. On weekends, she took odd jobs, folding laundry for old women, organizing closets, even sewing curtains for neighbors, when they found out she had a knack for it. Every dollar mattered, but it was never enough. Hospital bills were mounting. The doctors told her that carrying triplets meant high risk. For the babies, and for her. The words bed rest came up often, but she couldn't afford rest. There was no partner to help, no family to lean on. Her parents had cut her off after she refused to say who the father was. "We didn't raise you to be careless," her mother had snapped during their final call. "If you want to make your bed, lie in it alone." So she did. Alone. Some nights, Emily lay on the sagging mattress in her tiny bedroom, hands pressed to her stomach, whispering to the 3 heartbeats growing inside her. She gave them names before she even saw their faces: Hope, Lily, and Emma. She spoke to them like they were already there, promising they would be safe, that she would not break. She told them stories, read them old children's books from the library, and sang softly, even when tears soaked her pillow. There were times she came close to giving up, the night her legs gave out on the subway platform and no one helped her. The time she fainted in the diner's restroom from exhaustion and had to pull herself up using the sink. The winter her heat got shut off for 3 days, and she huddled beneath 4 layers of blankets, praying her body could keep the babies warm. But every time she hit that wall, something invisible pushed her forward, a flutter in her belly. A tiny kick. A reminder that she wasn't alone. Her doctor warned her during the 7th month, "You need to slow down. One wrong fall and all 3 could be in danger." Emily nodded, but returned to work the next day anyway. Quitting was not an option. She wrote down her birth plan in a spiral notebook, and though it was short on details, no family, no husband, no one waiting in the hall, she clung to it like a lifeline. And then, in the early hours of a rainy Tuesday, her water broke while she was walking home from her night shift. She was soaked, limping, clutching her belly and gasping, alone on a near-empty street. A passing cab saw her and stopped. She couldn't even speak from the pain, just pointed toward her stomach. The driver rushed her to the ER, yelling for nurses as they wheeled her in. The next hours were a blur of lights, pain, and panic. But at 5:46 a.m., after a grueling emergency C-section, the room fell quiet, then filled with 3 sharp, overlapping cries. Hope came first, then Lily, then Emma. They were tiny, impossibly so, each wrapped in a pink blanket, eyes closed but faces peaceful. One nurse whispered, "Triplets, and they're strong." Emily lay still, tears rolling down her cheeks. She was weak, stitched and swollen, every part of her body aching. But in that moment, she had never felt more alive. The hospital let her hold them, only for a minute each before they were taken to the NICU. But it was enough. She had seen their faces. 3 little girls, with blue eyes like frozen lakes, and tufts of soft blonde hair. They looked like Liam. Achingly, unmistakably like him. But they were hers. They were her reason. She spent the next few weeks in recovery, barely able to walk but determined to feed and visit the babies every 3 hours. She learned how to hold 2 at once while bottle feeding the 3rd. She learned how to read their cries, their breathing, the rhythm of their sleep. She smiled through exhaustion and kissed every forehead, whispering promises she would die to keep. Emily had no savings left, and the hospital bills were crushing. But she refused to ask for help. Every day she got stronger. Every hour, the girls gained weight. And 1 month later, all 3 were discharged together. She pushed their stroller down the street with trembling arms and a defiant heart. No father, no family, no safety net. But she had them. She had 3 reasons to fight. And a fire inside her that no one could extinguish. As they turned the corner onto her street, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. Emily smiled up at it. It wasn't victory, yet. But it was the beginning. The first year was survival. Emily barely remembered the passing of seasons, only the rhythm of feedings, diapers and sleepless nights. Every day bled into the next, measured not by hours, but by cries and coos, by bottles and lullabies, by the weight of 3 tiny bodies depending entirely on her. Her apartment was too small, too cold in the winter, too hot in the summer, and filled with the constant noise of life. Not the peaceful kind, but the beautiful chaos of infancy times 3. But even through the exhaustion, she found moments of stillness. When all 3 girls were asleep, their chests rising and falling in unison, Emily would sit on the floor, lean her back against the crib, and allow herself to breathe. Sometimes she cried, not out of sadness, but because the love she felt for them was too big for her chest. She quickly discovered that raising 3 daughters alone was not only emotionally overwhelming but logistically a nightmare. Even going to the grocery store required planning, patience, and 3 sets of everything: diapers, formula, clothes, socks, that constantly disappeared in the wash. She learned how to carry 2 babies in slings strapped across her chest and back, with one in the stroller. She learned how to feed them simultaneously, burp them in turns, and sleep for 10-minute intervals like a soldier on watch. She had no one to lean on, no partner to pass the crying baby to at 3 a.m., no grandparents knocking with casseroles. But she had something else. An unshakable will. It was around their 2nd year that the world started to notice them. Strangers would stop her on the street to marvel at the girls. 3 little blonde-haired, blue-eyed angels who looked more like dolls than real children. They drew attention wherever they went. And not just for their looks. Hope was bold, always leading with curiosity. Lily was quiet and observant, studying everyone with her wide eyes. Emma was the heart. The one who hugged first. Who cried when someone else did. Who laughed like music. One day in the park, a woman approached Emily while the girls were playing near the sandbox. She introduced herself as a stylist for children's catalogs, and asked if Emily would be open to letting the girls model for a small brand. At first Emily declined. She didn't want them exposed to anything artificial, didn't want them treated like little props. But after rent went up again and she nearly ran out of money for formula, she called the woman back. The shoot was simple. Soft lighting, pastel backdrops, tiny dresses. Emily watched carefully the entire time, never letting the girls out of sight. But they had fun. They posed like it was a game, giggling and playing with the props. The brand loved the results, and asked to book them again. That one job turned into 2, then 5. The money helped, but Emily stayed cautious. She kept full control of their time, and said no to anything that felt exploitative. She refused offers that wanted to separate the girls or push them into long studio hours. They would have a normal life, even if their faces started showing up in lookbooks and ads for boutique children's clothing lines. At the same time, Emily began sewing again. She had learned as a teenager from her grandmother, who used to make dresses on an old Singer machine in Michigan. At first she only made outfits for the girls, simple, beautiful things that fit them perfectly because no store ever sold 3 identical dresses that also let each girl feel unique. Other moms in the neighborhood noticed and began asking for commissions. Emily would sew at night after the girls went to bed, sometimes with Hope curled up at her feet, or Emma snoring gently on her shoulder. She sticked quietly, surrounded by soft lamplight, her hands steady, even when her heart wasn't. One day, a local photographer asked if she could use Emily's dresses in a children's shoot. Emily agreed, and the photos unexpectedly went viral. Her email inbox flooded with messages from people asking where they could buy the clothing. She didn't even have a brand name yet. She quickly made a simple website using a free builder and called the line 3 Little Lights, after her daughters, the only light that had guided her through years of darkness. Orders began coming in faster than she could fill them. She bought fabric in bulk from a supplier in Queens, and converted half the apartment into a sewing studio. The girls would play around her feet while she worked, and sometimes she'd sew with one hand while feeding Emma with the other. It was chaos, but it was hers. By the time the girls turned 4, Emily had moved into a slightly bigger apartment, still in Brooklyn but with more sunlight and a 2nd bedroom. The boutique modeling continued, but on her terms. Her clothing line had grown steadily, with influencers and parenting blogs calling her the mom who turned struggle into style. She even got interviewed for a local news segment. When the reporter asked her how she did it all on her own, Emily simply smiled and said, "I didn't do it alone. I had 3 little reasons to keep going." The girls were thriving. They were inseparable, but distinct. Emily encouraged them to develop their own identities. Different favorite colors, different stories at bedtime, different dreams. Hope wanted to be a veterinarian. Lily liked books about space. Emma wanted to sing on stage. Emily didn't know how she would afford those dreams, but she was determined to give them everything she could. Sometimes in the quiet of night, she still thought of Liam, not with bitterness, but with a hollow sort of wondering, whether he'd changed, whether he'd feel anything if he saw their faces. She never searched for him, she never tried to track him down, or show him what he had walked away from. That part of her life was closed. Or, so she thought. What she didn't know was that life was not done surprising her. That everything she had built from the ashes was about to be tested. But for now, she sewed late into the night. 3 sleeping girls down the hall, and believed, for the first time, that maybe she was finally getting somewhere close to peace. The invitation arrived on thick ivory cardstock, the kind of paper that smelled like money. The gold lettering shimmered under the kitchen light as Emily read it over for the 3rd time. It was an invitation to the Manhattan Business Women's Gala, a prestigious annual event filled with investors, fashion icons, and elite entrepreneurs. She had never been invited to something like this before. Not even close. When she first opened it, she thought it must have been a mistake, but the note inside was addressed to her directly, complimenting the recent success of 3 Little Lights, and requesting her presence as a guest of honor among other rising stars in business. For a long time she just stood there, holding it, her heart beating in strange rhythms. She wasn't sure whether to go. There was a voice in her, quiet but sharp, that whispered she didn't belong in rooms like that. That voice sounded a lot like the old Emily, the one who had stood alone outside the hospital 5 years ago with 3 newborns and nothing but a bus pass. But the girls had changed that. Her work had changed that. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something. She had employees, clients, a brand people recognized, and if she wanted to grow it further, she had to walk into the very rooms she once feared. So, she said yes. The night of the gala arrived in a flurry of chaos. The girls were more excited than she was, twirling around her in the living room as she got dressed. She wore a midnight blue gown she had designed herself, elegant, timeless, simple. Her hair was swept into soft waves and for once, she allowed herself to look like she belonged in luxury. Hope gasped and said she looked like a queen. Lily asked if she was nervous. Emma insisted she bring one of their friendship bracelets just in case you miss us too much. She tied it around Emily's wrist with solemn ceremony. Emily left them with her trusted neighbor and stepped into the hired car, heart thudding as the skyline pulled into view. The event was held at a glass-walled venue in Tribeca, with chandeliers like falling stars and waiters offering champagne the moment guests stepped inside. She walked through the entrance like someone crossing into a different life, unsure if she was welcome but determined not to retreat. For a while she mingled quietly. People introduced themselves, asked polite questions, complimented her line, asked about her daughters, then drifted away to someone more powerful. She smiled through it all, grateful but also wary. The room was filled with people who had always lived above the clouds, and though she wore the dress of someone who belonged, she still felt the weight of the ground beneath her feet. She was standing near a marble-topped bar sipping sparkling water when she heard his voice. It came from across the room, unmistakable. Deeper now, maybe more worn, but still the same. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly. There he was, Liam Hastings. He was talking to someone in a sleek black suit, drink in hand. His blonde hair still impeccably styled, his posture as confident and untouched by consequence as she remembered. But time had etched a few changes. There were lines around his eyes now, and something heavier in his expression, when he wasn't speaking. The moment he turned and saw her, the glass in his hand stopped, halfway to his lips. For a second, the world blurred. Then his eyes dropped and she saw it: confusion, disbelief, recognition, all crashing into him like a silent car wreck. His gaze flicked down to the friendship bracelet on her wrist, then back up to her face. She held his stare with quiet calm. She had imagined this moment more times than she could count, and now that it was real it felt strangely controlled. She was no longer the girl begging him to see her. She didn't owe him anything. Before he could move toward her, a new sound cut through the air. Small footsteps. 3 little girls stood at the entrance, dressed in matching cream-colored dresses, their hair curled, their blue eyes bright. Emily froze. She hadn't brought them. The neighbor had been invited to the gala's family-friendly side event upstairs, a feature for women in business who were also mothers. Apparently, the girls had grown bored and insisted they come find their mother. Security must have let them in with their babysitter, recognizing Emily's name on the guest list. Liam turned and saw them. The moment his eyes landed on the girls, something inside him cracked wide open. His jaw clenched. He took an unconscious step forward. The resemblance was undeniable. It hit him like a punch. Their eyes. His eyes. The shape of their mouths, their hair, their expressions. 3 perfect mirrors of a face he saw every day in his own reflection. Hope noticed him first. She tugged at Emily's dress. "Mommy, who's that man looking at us?" Emily's throat tightened. She didn't answer right away. She reached down and gently took her daughter's hands. Liam took another step, slower this time. He wasn't smiling. His face was pale, stunned, almost haunted. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. His hands trembled. For the first time in the 5 years since she had seen him, he looked lost. "Emily," he finally said, his voice rough. She didn't respond. Not yet. All around them, the gala buzzed on, guests laughing, music swelling, crystal glasses clinking. But in that moment, the room narrowed down to the space between the man who had walked away from his children, and the woman who had raised them without him. Liam looked down at the girls, then up at her again. His lips parted, but whatever he meant to say caught in his throat. Emily stood tall, the soft weight of her daughters anchoring her, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel small in his presence. She felt power, not the kind that came from money or fame, but the kind born of pain, resilience, and love, multiplied by 3. And Liam, for all his success, looked like a man seeing a miracle he hadn't earned. She turned to the girls and smiled. "Come on, darlings. Let's go meet the people who know what real work looks like." Then she walked past him without another glance, her daughters at her side, leaving him behind in a silence far louder than anything she could have said. The morning after the gala, Emily woke to a strange heaviness in the air, the kind that clung to her skin like fog. The girls were still asleep, their little bodies tangled in blankets, their faces peaceful and untouched by the storm brewing just outside their world. Emily sat in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee that had gone cold, staring at the bracelet around her wrist. The one Emma had tied on before the event. She hadn't taken it off. She knew he would find her, she could feel it. It didn't take long. By midday an email appeared in her inbox. No subject line, no introduction, just one question. "Are they mine?" She didn't answer. Not immediately. She spent the rest of the day at the shop, sewing in near silence while her assistant ran the front. The girls played in the back room with fabric scraps and buttons, unaware of how much history was breathing down their necks. Emily couldn't focus. Her hands kept slipping, her stitching uneven. She kept thinking of his face at the gala. Not arrogant, not smug, not cold, just shocked. As if someone had held up a mirror he didn't know existed. 2 days passed, another message came. "I need to see you, please. Just talk." She replied this time. One line. "Tomorrow 3 p.m., my studio, alone." When he walked in, she was already waiting, sitting on a stool beside a rack of spring dresses. She didn't rise. He stood in the doorway for a few seconds, then slowly approached, hands in his coat pockets, like he didn't know what else to do with them. He looked different in daylight, less polished, more human. There were dark circles under his eyes and he hadn't shaved. She wondered for a brief, strange second if he'd slept at all since that night. "They're yours," she said before he could speak. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "All 3. Liam let out a shaky breath and sat across from her, his movements careful, as if he were afraid of breaking the air between them. "I had no idea," he said. "Not even a suspicion. If I had—" "You did," she interrupted quietly. "I told you. I said I was pregnant." I told you I needed you. His face twisted. I was a coward. I thought you were bluffing, that it would go away, that I could keep my life untouched. You could have asked. One phone call, one message, in 5 years. He nodded slowly, shame radiating from him like heat. I don't have an excuse. I've tried to come up with one, but there isn't any. I was selfish, and stupid, and scared. Emily stood up then, walking to the sewing table, her back to him. Do you know what it's like to give birth to 3 babies, with no one waiting outside the delivery room? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. To hold them and realize you have to become everything. Mother, father, protector, provider. Oh, they won't make it. He said nothing. She turned around slowly. Do you know how many nights I went without eating, because there wasn't enough for all of us? How many days I carried 2 on my chest, and pushed the 3rd in a stroller through snow, just to get to work? Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He didn't dare. I wasn't trying to punish you, she continued. I didn't tell the world your name. I didn't chase you down. I wasn't waiting for some grand apology. I just moved forward. Because I had to. I want to meet them, he said finally, his voice hoarse. I know I don't deserve it, I know it's late. But I want to try. Emily studied him, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. They're not a prize, Liam. They're not your redemption arc. I know. And if you even think about leaving again. I won't, he swallowed hard. I saw them, and something inside me just broke open. They're my daughters. I've missed 5 years, but if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. She didn't answer right away. Her heart was pounding so loud it made it hard to think clearly. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw every broken piece of her past in his face, but another part, the exhausted, aching part, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. I don't know what kind of role you can have, she said slowly. Not yet. They don't know who you are. They've never asked. But if I tell them, it has to be on my terms. With care. You don't get to walk in and play hero. He nodded. Of course. I need time, she said, and boundaries. Whatever you need, he said. Anything. For a moment, there was silence. Then Liam reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A folded photo. He handed it to her without a word. It was an old picture, one she hadn't seen in years. Her and Liam, taken in the early days when everything still felt possible. She was laughing, leaning into him. He was looking at her like she was the only thing that existed. I kept it, he said softly. Even when I tried to forget everything else. She held the photo for a long time. Then slowly folded it, and placed it back in his hand. Carter said matter-of-factly. That man doesn't exist anymore, she said. And neither does that girl. But as she looked at him, older, quieter, wounded in a way that wasn't performative, she didn't slam the door. She didn't scream. She didn't ask him to leave. Instead she nodded once and said, Come back tomorrow, we'll talk more. And maybe you can meet them. Then she walked past him and back to her sewing machine, not because she didn't care, but because there was still work to do, and 3 little girls down the hall who needed dinner. The day of the DNA test was gray, the sky hanging low over the city like a blanket of ash. Emily didn't want to go. Every part of her body resisted the idea of walking into a sterile building just to prove something she had always known. Something her entire life had been shaped around. But she had agreed. Not for Liam. Not to justify anything. She did it for her daughters, so that in the future, if questions ever arose, there would be no ambiguity, no rewritten stories. Just the truth, printed and signed and undeniable. They met at a private clinic in Midtown, tucked between a florist and a law firm. Liam was already inside when she arrived, sitting in the waiting area with his hands clasped so tightly she could see the color drained from his knuckles. He stood when he saw her, but she didn't offer a smile. There wasn't space for politeness today. The nurse explained everything quickly and efficiently. It would take a few days to process the results. They collected the samples. Simple? fast, mechanical. Emily submitted her part without a word. Liam hesitated before swabbing the inside of his cheek, his eyes flicking toward her once, almost as if asking for some kind of reassurance. She gave him none. After it was done, they stepped outside into the wind, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Cars rushed past on the street, a siren wailed in the distance. Life, unaware, uncaring, moved forward. "I don't need paperwork to tell me they're mine," Liam said, finally breaking the silence. "But I understand why we had to do it. I can't believe I missed all of it. The first words, first steps, everything." "You didn't miss it," Emily replied, her voice quiet but sharp. "You chose not to be there." He nodded. He didn't argue. That at least was progress. When the results arrived 3 days later, he showed up at her studio holding the envelope like it was a verdict. She had already read her copy earlier that morning. The answer, of course, was yes. A 99% match. He was the biological father of Hope, Lily, and Emma. "I don't know why this hits me so hard," he said, voice shaking as he sat down beside one of the mannequins she used for fittings. "I knew it, but seeing it on paper, I feel like I'm looking at a mirror I smashed 5 years ago. And now I'm staring at the pieces." Emily was sitting across from him, needle in hand, mending a tiny sleeve. She didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't cruel anymore. It was something different now, heavier, more honest. "I want to meet them," Liam said again, "properly. I don't want to just be some stranger they once saw at a fancy party." "They don't know you exist," she said. "They've asked about it, Dad, yes, but I never told them you were gone. I just said they were made with love, and that they have each other. They don't feel abandoned. That's because I never let them." She paused, her needle pulling cleanly through fabric. "If you want to be in their lives, it's not about you, it's about them. And I need to know you're ready for that." "I am," he said quickly, leaning forward. "I know I'll never get back the lost time, but I'm not here to erase your work. I'm here to add to it, if you'll let me." His sincerity was uncomfortable. Not because she didn't want to believe him, but because some part of her did. And that scared her more than anything else. So she set ground rules. She made it clear that any relationship with the girls would start slow, as a friend of Mommy's, someone kind and safe, who would become familiar over time. No grand reveals, no pressure, and absolutely no inconsistency. If he showed up once and then vanished again, there would be no second chance. He agreed to everything, every boundary, every condition. There was no protest in him. Only quiet determination, the kind that came from realizing too late how much had been lost. The first meeting happened that weekend. Emily had arranged a quiet afternoon in Prospect Park. Not some overwhelming reunion, just a simple picnic under the trees. The girls were dressed in their favorite outfits, each with her own little backpack full of coloring books, snacks, and treasures they insisted on bringing. Liam arrived in jeans and a sweater, looking more like a teacher than a billionaire. When he saw them, he froze. His face crumbled with something Emily couldn't quite name. Awe, guilt, heartbreak, joy. He approached slowly. Emily knelt beside the girls and smiled as they looked up. "Girls," she said gently, "this is Liam, he's a friend of mine. He wanted to meet you." Hope, ever the brave one, stepped forward first. "Hi, I'm Hope. I'm the oldest, by 2 minutes. Lily followed close behind, offering a cautious wave. "I'm Lily, I like space and stars." Emma grinned and ran up without hesitation. "I'm Emma, I like hugs." Then she wrapped her arms around Liam's legs without a second thought. He knelt down, eyes glassy, and returned the hug carefully, like she might break. "It's so nice to meet all of you," he whispered. They spent hours together, drawing pictures, playing with frisbees, talking about their favorite books. Liam listened more than he spoke. He never pushed. He never tried to claim anything. He just showed up, fully, quietly, attentively. By the end of the day, Hope declared that he was cool for a grown-up. Lily let him help her with her glow-in-the-dark constellation puzzle, and Emma fell asleep with her head on his lap. Emily watched all of it from a few feet away, heart tangled in 1,000 emotions. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if any of it would last. But something was shifting, something real, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. It felt like she was building something solid, something that could last. For a while, it seemed like the storm had passed. Weeks turned into months, and the once unimaginable became normal. Liam began visiting regularly, always sticking to the boundaries Emily had laid out. He never pushed, never demanded, and never missed a scheduled meeting. At first, the girls only saw him in safe, familiar spaces. The park, the studio, their favorite diner with the animal pancakes. But, eventually, Emily allowed him into their home if only for brief visits. He would bring books, games, sometimes little crafts he swore he made himself, though Emily suspected a very expensive assistant had helped. The girls adored him. Not in an immediate, overwhelming way, but gradually, like a new tree growing among roots that had always been there. They started calling him Mr. Liam, then Uncle Liam, and finally, Emma, always the fearless one, tried out Daddy one evening as she climbed into his lap, eyes sleepy and arms wrapped around his neck. He didn't react with tears or theatrics, he just held her a little tighter, as if hearing that word had stitched something back together in him. Emily watched it happen without stopping it. She no longer felt the same need to protect every moment from him. He had shown up. He had stayed. But peace has a way of making people nervous, especially those who have lived too long inside chaos. It started with a headline. A tabloid had picked up whispers of Liam's secret children, and the photo they used was an old image of Emily at a charity event, standing next to the girls in matching dresses. It hadn't been meant for the public, but someone must have sold it. Suddenly, blogs and gossip sites lit up with speculation. Was the tech mogul hiding triplets? Was he the father? Who was the mystery woman from Brooklyn? The article went viral in hours. Emily's phone began vibrating non-stop. Calls, messages, interview requests, even threats. Her inbox filled with brands asking if the girls could pose with their father for a family-themed campaign. Others accused her of trapping him, of gold-digging, of lying, of using the girls as leverage. She kept the girls home from school for a week, and turned off all notifications. Liam showed up that night, fists clenched, his face pale with fury. He had no idea how it happened. His team was already working on it. He wanted to issue a statement, something to protect them, but Emily, calm and sharp, said no. She didn't want the girls used as shields for his reputation. They were not a PR tool. The backlash didn't end. One morning when Emily walked outside to take out the trash, she found a spray-painted message on her apartment wall. Liar. 2 days later, someone left a broken baby doll at her doorstep. The police couldn't do much. No one had seen anything. Liam came over that evening, pacing the living room as the girls played quietly in their room, oblivious to the world's ugliness. He told her to move. He said he had a private house upstate, fully staffed, fully secured, where they would all be safe. I'm not hiding, Emily said. I've never hidden, I raised them in the open, in the truth. You're the one who ran. I know, he said, his voice rough. But this time I'm not running. I'm standing still. And if I have to put a wall between them and the world, I will. I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm asking you to let me protect the one you built. It wasn't an easy decision. Emily hated the idea of being seen as weak, of appearing to lean on him. But after the third time someone tried to take photos of the girls at the playground, after Emma came home crying because a stranger had asked her if her daddy was famous, she agreed. They moved in the middle of the night. Liam arranged everything with precision and silence. 2 black SUVs, a trusted driver, and a small moving crew that packed their lives into boxes under moonlight. The house was a modern fortress surrounded by trees, far from curious eyes. The girls were told it was an adventure, a vacation, something special. And they accepted it with wide-eyed wonder. too young to know it was protection disguised as luxury. Emily struggled in the first weeks. She missed the rhythm of her studio, the corner coffee shop, the freedom of her own space. She hated the quiet. But the girls adjusted quickly. Enchanted by the garden, the indoor pool and the room full of books with beanbag chairs and starlight lamps. Liam gave them space. He didn't try to take over. He simply became a constant recompressor, reading bedtime stories, cooking awkward pancakes on Sundays, walking them to the end of the driveway for their homeschooling van. And gradually, without meaning to, Emily softened. There was one night late in October, when a thunderstorm knocked out power for a few minutes. The house went dark, and Emma started to cry. Liam scooped her up and carried her to the fireplace, lighting it by hand while whispering nonsense stories about rain dragons and lightning cats. Emily stood in the shadows, watching the firelight flicker across his face, and realized she no longer saw the man who had left her in an office 5 years ago. She saw a man who had been broken by his own fear, and who was now trying, piece by piece, to earn something real. She didn't trust easily. She didn't forgive completely. But when Liam fell asleep that night on the couch with 2 of the girls sprawled across him like kittens, she brought him a blanket, draped it over his shoulders, and whispered, "Thank you." She never said it before. He never asked her to, but in that moment, it was enough. Because the war was still out there, in the headlines, in the past, in the memory of everything they'd both done wrong. But inside that house, on that night, they were safe. And that was a beginning neither of them had expected to find. Spring arrived slowly in upstate New York, with frost still clinging to the ground long after the sun rose. The trees outside the estate stretched themselves back to life, and the garden began to bloom with cautious color. Inside the house, life had found a rhythm, one Emily never imagined she'd experience. The girls had settled into their routines: school in the mornings, crafts in the afternoons, and evenings full of laughter, books, and long games of make-believe. Their voices echoed through the halls like wind chimes, clear and ever-present. They had stopped asking when they would go back to Brooklyn. This was home now. Emily had changed too. She still ran her business, remotely now, with a quiet efficiency. She kept sewing, though the pace had slowed, no longer driven by desperation but by joy. Her studio had been rebuilt, in the east wing of the house, a wide, sunlit room filled with color and texture and the soft hum of creativity. She took long walks in the morning before the girls woke up, coffee in hand, letting herself breathe deeply without the old weight pressing on her chest. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace. And she had learned, over the years, to take peace where she could find it. Liam had not only kept his promises, he had exceeded them. He had become a presence in their lives, not through grand gestures, but through consistency. He helped with math homework, sat through dance recitals in the living room, and memorized each girl's bedtime routine without ever being asked. He knew Hope hated raisins, that Lily needed the nightlight on even if she pretended she didn't, and that Emma couldn't fall asleep unless someone told her a story about the moon. He listened more than he spoke. He showed up even on the days when work pulled at him. And slowly, the girls stopped seeing him as a visitor, and started seeing him as part of them. It had been nearly a year since the night they left Brooklyn, when Liam asked Emily to marry him. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flash mob or ring hidden in dessert. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon while they were folding laundry. The girls were playing in the other room, giggling over some game only they understood. Liam was holding one of Emma's shirts, soft and pink, when he looked at Emily and said, "I know this isn't the way people normally ask, but I love you. I love them. And I want this. Every day. I want to build a life with you, not just around them but because of them. Will you marry me?" She stared at him, caught completely off guard. Marriage had never felt like an option, not after everything. It had seemed like a fantasy other people were allowed to reach for. But looking at him now, the man who had once turned away from everything, she saw someone who had rebuilt himself piece by piece. She didn't answer right away. She needed to feel the answer in her bones. That night, after the girls were asleep and the house was still, She sat by the window and thought about every version of herself she had been. The 19-year-old girl, crying in a bathroom stall. The mother, holding 3 newborns alone in a hospital bed. The woman sewing clothes by candlelight. The fighter who stood in front of a man who had broken her and dared him to face what he left behind. They were all still inside her, but now so was the woman who had survived it all. Who had built a life from ash and thread and love. The next morning, she said yes. The wedding was small. No headlines. No press. Just family. The kind that was chosen, not inherited. The ceremony took place in the garden, under a canopy of blooming white blossoms, with birdsong and laughter filling the air. The girls wore dresses they had helped Emily design, each one unique but cut from the same fabric. Hope walked ahead with a bouquet nearly as big as her. Lily handed out handmade paper stars to each guest. Emma was the flower girl and refused to walk. She ran down the aisle, laughing, arms full of petals. Liam waited for her at the end of the path, his suit perfectly tailored, his face soft and full of wonder. When Emily appeared, in a gown made of silk and stitched by her own hands, the entire crowd stood, but Liam didn't notice anyone else. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he's never believed he was worthy of. Something he's willing to spend the rest of his life earning. They didn't say traditional vows, instead they spoke from the heart. Emily promised to never forget what it had taken to get here. To never stop protecting the love they'd built from scratch. Liam promised not to fix the past but to honor it. To walk beside her, and the girls, every step forward. No matter how difficult or imperfect. After the ceremony, the girls ran barefoot across the lawn, shrieking with joy. Music played, not a playlist but live. A string quartet tucked under the oak tree, performing soft, warm melodies as evening fell. They danced until the stars came out, and even after. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet again, Emily lay beside Liam in the bed they now shared. The windows were open, letting in the scent of blooming jasmine. The bracelet Emma had made her, now worn and faded, still wrapped around her wrist. She hadn't taken it off, not even for the wedding. She whispered into the dark, "Do you ever wonder how different it would have been if you had stayed, back then?" He was quiet for a long time before answering. "Every day. But then I remember. If I hadn't left, I might not have become the man I needed to be, to deserve this now." She turned toward him, her voice steady. "You still have to earn it, every day." "I know," he said. "And I will." Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and somewhere in the hallway, one of the girls mumbled in her sleep. Emily smiled, reached for Liam's hand, and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, there were no alarms in her chest, no claws of doubt gripping her spine, no fear waiting in the wings. Only love, steady and whole, built from ashes and second chances. And this time, it would last. This ending isn't just about romance or redemption. It's about earned healing. What makes the story powerful is that it never asks us to forget the pain, the betrayal, or the brutal loneliness Emily endured. Instead, it honors her strength. She didn't wait to be saved, she became the savior. For herself and her daughters. Liam's return isn't a fairy tale fix. He doesn't magically erase the past, he walks through the wreckage he created and chooses to rebuild. Slowly, humbly. That's what makes his transformation believable and moving. But the true heart of this story is the evolution of love. Not the fireworks of falling in love, but the deep, quiet kind that's forged in fire, in late-night feedings, in scraped knees, in hard-earned trust. It reminds us that family isn't made by blood, or promises spoken once, but by what we show up for again and again. And in the end, the message is simple and beautiful. Second chances aren't given. They're built.